Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're jumping right into some source material you shared with us, an article called, Is Marriage Still Relevant?
Yeah. That title, it really doesn't beat around the bush, does it?
Not at all. It gets straight to that core question. In the world today, does marriage actually still hold unique value?
Right. Especially when alternatives like just living together, cohabitation, are so common now. Are they basically the same thing, or is one maybe, better?
Exactly. And our mission here, as always, is to take your source, this article, and really unpack its key points.
We'll dig into the insights, the facts, maybe some surprising data it presents.
Yeah, just to help you understand the perspective this specific article lays out on what's, let's face it, a pretty complex topic.
And the article, it definitely dives in. It looks at how people seem to view marriage now, contrast that with some pretty striking statistics, and really tries to explore what it sees as these fundamental differences between being married and just cohabiting.
And we should probably say up front, some of the stuff the article highlights, especially when it puts common assumptions up against the data it cites, well, it might challenge what you think you know.
Definitely. So let's start where the article does. It points to what it describes as this growing cynicism, pessimism maybe, towards marriage today.
Yeah, a kind of wariness.
Exactly. A lot of people seem hesitant, maybe even a bit scared of the commitment involved.
And the article mentions those reasons you often hear, right? Like questioning if it's really worth it.
Or seeing it as unrealistic, maybe too demanding financially.
Or, sacrificing freedom, sexual freedom, personal autonomy, that kind of thing.
And then there's the big one, the fear of divorce, that 50% number that gets thrown around all the time.
Right. And the article even mentions this fear of becoming boring. That feeling of, oh, great, my choices are single and lonely or married and bored.
It's a bleak picture it paints of some modern views.
So understandably, people start looking for something else, something in between.
And that leads right into cohabitation, doesn't it?
It does. The article highlights this huge shift. Back in the early 1900s, basically nobody lived together before marriage.
Right, it just wasn't done.
But today, it's almost the default. The article says practically everyone who gets married now has lived together first.
So the path looks different. It's like date, move in together, and then maybe marriage comes later.
Which brings us to the first big assumption the article really wants to tackle.
Okay.
This common idea that living together first is smart. It's like a test drive for the relationship.
Yeah, the idea that it helps you figure out compatibility before you make the big leap.
Right, and that supposedly makes your marriage stronger, less likely to end in divorce. A wise precaution, as the article puts it.
Okay, sounds logical enough on the surface.
But here's the first surprise the article throws out there. It says the data, the actual statistics, they contradict this.
Wait, really? Contradict the idea that living together helps prevent divorce?
That's what the source argues. It points to specific research.
Okay, like what? Well, there's a study mentioned, Rosenfeld and Rosler in the Journal of Marriage and Family. They apparently found a clear link between living together before marriage and actually increased odds of divorce later on.
Increased odds, not decreased.
Yeah. Now, the article does note the odds are a bit lower in the very first year of marriage for those who cohabited.
Okay, a small initial benefit maybe.
But after that first year, the odds of divorce actually increase in all the other years they looked at. And this pattern, it holds across decades of data, apparently.
Wow. Okay, so the thing people do to try and divorce-proof their marriage might actually make it more likely down the road, according to this research anyway.
That's the finding presented. It really pushes back on that test drive idea.
Any other evidence mentioned?
Yeah. The article also brings up some analysis of British data by Benson and McKay. Their work suggests cohabitation might even make people less likely to get married in the first place.
Well, so.
They talk about breakups of unmarried couples who live together as a kind of millennial divorce. The relationship ends before it ever gets to marriage.
So, if your goal is actually to get married and stay married, living together first might, paradoxically, make that less likely.
That's the conclusion the article draws from this data. It even includes a quote, I think, from Jordan Peterson, basically saying cohabitation without that permanent public commitment, it doesn't build stronger marriages, and it's particularly tough on kids if the relationship breaks up.
That definitely challenges the popular view. But what about the other angle? Maybe marriage isn't the goal. What if cohabitation is just better? A better alternative altogether.
Right. The article acknowledges that argument. Some people say, look, if you ignore religious stuff, there's no real difference, right? Why bother with marriage?
But the article pushes back on that too.
Strongly. It cites, numerous studies claiming that people who are just cohabiting are consistently found to be far less content in their relationships compared to married couples.
Far less content. Okay, that's another surprising claim. What's the evidence there?
It draws on quite a bit, like the General Social Survey finding that 60% of married folks say they're very happy.
Okay, that's a high number.
But maybe even more striking are findings from longitudinal studies. They tracked people who rated their marriage as very unhappy at one point.
Right.
Of those who stayed married, 5 years later, a huge majority, 77%, reported being very happy. Or quite happy.
77% from very unhappy to happy. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's just sticking it out often works.
That's certainly the implication the article draws. It quotes a sociologist, Linda Waite, suggesting the benefits of divorce have been oversold. And it doesn't stop at happiness. It mentions a YouGov survey from late 2018. Compared to cohabiting couples, married people reported significantly higher relationship satisfaction.
By how much?
About 12 percentage points higher. And even bigger gaps for stability, that was 26 points higher for married couples, and commitment, which was 15 points higher.
So satisfaction, stability, and commitment. All scoring higher for married couples in that survey.
According to that data, yes. And the article adds more, like a 2019 Pew Research survey finding married adults have more satisfaction, trust, and closeness.
Okay.
And it references general findings from places like the University of Virginia's National Marriage Project, saying married people consistently show higher life satisfaction and other benefits compared to single or cohabiting individuals.
So the article is really compiling a lot of empirical evidence here.
It is, and its conclusion on this point is pretty unambiguous. It asserts the evidence overwhelmingly suggests being married offers an enormous enhancement to well-being compared to just living together.
And it extends this argument to children too, right?
Yeah.
It says cohabitation isn't better when kids are involved either.
Correct. It notes the rise in births to cohabiting parents, but also the decline in kids living with both their natural parents throughout childhood.
And the reasons cited for that decline.
It comes back to stability. Cohabiting relationships, the article states, just break up at a much higher rate than marriages do.
Is there specific data on that?
Yes, it points to some striking European data from the Social Trends Institute and Institute for Family Studies. Looking across 16 countries, children born to cohabiting parents were about 90% more likely to see their parents separate by the time they were 12 compared to kids born to married parents.
90%. 90.
That's the figure presented. It's a massive difference in stability.
Wow. And the article's takeaway from that?
That parental breakups are really damaging for kids' development, and that the societal move away from marriage is contributing significantly to this instability for children.
Okay, so the article presents data suggesting cohabitation isn't a great stepping stone to marriage, nor is it a better alternative, especially for kids. But the big question is, why? What does the article say is the actual difference?
This is where it gets into the heart of the matter. It argues the fundamental difference lies in the vows and the nature of the commitment itself. It acknowledges that, maybe 40% of people think marriage is becoming obsolete.
Yeah.
But it contrasts that with what it sees as this deep, persistent human desire for a life partner, for profound love. And marriage, it argues, is the structure that best expresses that deep yearning.
So despite the cynicism, the core desire is still there.
Yes, but the article argues cohabitation alone doesn't quite scratch that itch because it lacks binding permanence.
How so?
It describes the boyfriend-girlfriend status, even living together, as inherently temporary. There isn't that same formal, public, lasting promise. One person can, relatively speaking, walk away much more easily than in a marriage.
Like keeping one foot out the door, maybe?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And the article suggests this creates this underlying, maybe subconscious hesitation when it comes to really big life decisions, buying a house together, having kids. There's always that little voice saying, what if this doesn't last? So you might hedge your bets.
Whereas marriage, in the article's view, is different because of the promise.
Exactly. That formal promise, till death do us part, provides a unique security, it argues. It frees people up to really invest everything, to go all in, because the intention is permanence.
And this is where the article introduces that idea of a covenant.
Precisely. It argues marriage isn't just a contract, it's a covenant. And it makes a clear distinction between the two.
Okay, what's the distinction according to the source?
Well, a contract is described as basically an agreement for mutual benefit. I give you this, you give me that. If one person doesn't hold up their end, the contract can often be broken.
Makes sense. Like a business deal.
Right. But a covenant, as the article defines it, is way deeper. It's a pledge. It's about giving yourself to the other person. It's a perpetual promise meant to hold up regardless of changing circumstances.
Regardless. Even if things get tough or one person is struggling.
That's the idea presented. In a covenant, you're responsible for upholding your end of the promise. And the article even suggests you're called to support the other person if they're failing or struggling, rather than just opting out.
That's a very different model than a simple contract. Much more demanding.
Absolutely. The article argues this covenant nature is crucial for 3 reasons. 1, it's a test it shows love has reached that serious marriage-level commitment.
Okay.
2, it's a resource. That solemn promise provides strength and stability when things get rocky, when feelings aren't enough.
Wow.
And 3, it's instructive. It teaches that marriage is fundamentally about giving, not just getting or fulfilling your own needs.
That really reframes the whole purpose. And this leads to that pretty bold statement the article makes.
Oh, yeah. It says something like, if you like then you seek marriage.
Why that distinction?
The argument is that real, deep love naturally leads to wanting permanence, wanting to make that binding promise. It's not content with temporary arrangements or easy outs.
It wants security, the all-in feeling.
Exactly. And the article brings up that National Marriage Project finding, again, suggesting cohabitation, sometimes lets men, particularly, get the benefits of a relationship while keeping options open.
Right, for a better partner.
Yeah. So the article interprets the suggestion of, let's just live together, instead of marrying when marriage is possible, as potentially sending an implicit message like, look, I like you now, this is convenient, but let's not lock this down just in case something better comes along or my feelings change.
Ouch. That's a pretty harsh interpretation presented there.
It is blunt. And it leads the article to pose some tough questions directly to you, the listener or reader. If you say you believe in marriage and you think you found the right person, why wouldn't you marry them? Is it deep down a lack of trust in them? Or maybe in yourself?
Or fear.
Fear of the responsibility? Or the toughest one, maybe it means you don't love them enough to give up the perceived safety net of other options? It really asks for some self-reflection.
And that connects to another key idea in the source. The difference between just liking someone and truly loving them. It argues real love is more robust than just a feeling.
Definitely. The article views liking or pleasure as being about fulfilling our needs. Like being thirsty, you drink, the need is met, the pleasure fades. It shows the other person only in relation to our desires.
So it's fundamentally self-centered.
That's the argument. It uses that example of lust wanting pleasure with the person, but maybe not the person themselves. Real, authentic love, the article argues, goes way beyond that. It desires the person sees them as valuable in themselves, apart from what they provide for you. It values them even above your own needs.
That's a radically different orientation from self to other.
It is. The article contrasts this with selfish love, which it says is conditional. Do you make me happy? Do you meet my needs? Real love, in this view, gives. It wants to serve, even suffer for the other. It's unconditional, vulnerable, holds nothing back. The article suggests that without understanding sacrifice, we often mistake self-centered affection for real love.
It's a high bar.
Exactly.
And this ties into commitment versus feelings again, right?
Exactly. The article notes Western culture often focuses on romance, maybe Eastern culture is more on duty or commitment. It says you need both.
But
the crucial point it makes is love is a commitment first, then a delight. The feelings, the delight, are an expression of the commitment, not the foundation itself.
So those initial butterflies?
Yeah.
They're great, but they aren't the main event.
Right. The article is realistic here. It says those intense feelings usually fade or change after a couple of years. Flaws appear. Boredom might creep in. Differences surface.
And it asks that key question. If love is just a feeling, what do you do when the feeling changes?
Because if the relationship stability depends only on your current feelings, then ultimately the relationship is just about serving you. The marriage promise, however, is made because of those initial feelings, perhaps, but the actual vow is to be true always, regardless of feelings. Promises are about will, about action, not emotions, which go up and down.
So even when you're not feeling it, that unity based on the promise, on the commitment, can still be there.
Yes. It uses the analogy of loving your kids even when they're driving you crazy. The feeling might be frustration, but the underlying love and commitment remain.
It pushes back against that idea that if the feelings fade, you must have made a mistake and should leave.
Yeah, it argues those initial intense feelings will fade with the next person, too. That's just how infatuation works. Emotions should be servants to the relationship, not the master.
So how do you nurture love beyond feelings then?
It comes back to that selfless giving love. Focus on giving, not just getting. Pour yourself into the other person. The article suggests that becoming less self-focused can actually lead to deeper, more lasting feelings. The reward of selfless love is more love.
And it defines marriage again in this light.
As this devotion, this mutual giving up of personal autonomy to gain a stronger joint autonomy, a commitment till death do us part.
It sounds incredibly demanding, though. The article doesn't pretend it's easy, does it?
No, it explicitly says marriage is intense. It's not meant to be easy, because nothing truly great is easy.
Okay.
Anyone can fall in love. That's the easy part.
Yeah.
But staying in love, sustaining it through life's challenges, that takes character. It takes resources beyond just feelings, especially when things are hard, when you don't feel like loving.
It tests you.
Deeply. In vulnerable areas, the article mentions things like lust, greed, pride, control, temper. It demands your best. It requires courage, sacrifice.
And it brings in the idea of patience here.
Yes, defining patience as love for the long haul.
Yeah.
It's about enduring difficulties without giving up or getting bitter.
Sticking with it.
Right. Continuing to work even when gratification isn't immediate. Taking life's hits, including disappointments within the marriage, without lashing out or running away.
So marriage calls for patience, for pushing through the hard times.
To keep loving through thick and thin, like the vows say. The article concludes that those who manage this, who stay patient and committed, gain the art of character.
There's one final layer the article touches on, right? Something about a bigger context.
Yeah, just briefly at the end. It argues there's a greater context to marriage that cohabitation just doesn't have, which is another reason, in its view, they aren't equivalent.
What kind of context?
It introduces a theological perspective, drawing on the Bible. It presents marriage as a kind of symbol or a shadow pointing towards God's own covenant love for humanity. That divine promise, you will be my people and I will be your God.
So human marriage reflects a divine pattern in this view.
That's the idea presented. That our deep-seated instinct for a lifelong committed partnership is actually meant to point us towards this greater reality of God's steadfast love. Marriage is a sign, incredibly important, but not the ultimate thing itself, which, the article suggests, paradoxically adds to its glory.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this all up. Based purely on the source material we've explored in this deep dive, what's the article's final answer? Is marriage still relevant?
Well, based entirely on the arguments and the data presented in this article, the answer is a clear yes. It argues cohabitation doesn't work well as a step towards marriage.
Right, citing increased divorce odds later, less likelihood of marrying.
Exactly. And it argues it's not a better alternative either, pointing to lower satisfaction, lower stability, less commitment, and those significant negative impacts on kids' stability when cohabiting parents split up.
And the core reason the article gives for all these differences.
It all comes down to the nature of the commitment. Marriage, as framed in the article, is this binding covenant. It's rooted in self-giving love, it demands character, patience, and it provides this unique structure and security. Cohabitation, it argues, simply lacks that depth of commitment, that permanence, that structure. And that lack leads to less security and, according to the data cited, generally poorer outcomes.
This has been, well, a really thorough look into one specific source's perspective on a huge question. It definitely makes a strong case, based on the evidence it chooses to present, for marriage's continued relevance and importance.
Yeah, its core conclusion seems to be nicely summed up in that line. Love needs trust. Trust needs commitment. And real commitment, in the end, needs a covenant.
And just to remind you, our goal here was simply to unpack the insights and the data from the source you provided, laying out its perspective for you.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, stemming from the article's arguments. If we accept its premise that true love is more about steadfast commitment than just fleeting feelings, what does that really imply for how we should approach choosing a partner and, maybe more importantly, how we build relationships designed to last?
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.